Hi guys, my name is Linda Gripridge. Welcome to Love and Guts. I had the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Max Gulhane last week on light exposure and the link with our gut health. Now due to technical issues, we have lost part of that conversation. So I am going to run through those first few questions myself, and then I'm going to be stitching on Max's content towards the end, so the information that we didn't lose. Now, it is his area of expertise, so I hope that I do it some level of justice before we get into some of the practical suggestions with Dr. Max. Now, if I'm looking up there, it's because I have pre-prepared my notes, so I avoid rambling and I just stay on track. So forgive me. Before we dive into it though, I do want to read out his bio. Dr. Max Gulhane is a practicing general practice registrar and health educator based in Australia. He graduated from the University of Melbourne in 2018 with the Doctor of Medicine, Master of Public Health, following his Bachelor of Science from the University of Queensland in 2013, where he investigated the effects of refined food diets on inflammatory bowel disease in mouse models. His current focus centres on the role of light, circadian rhythms, and mitochondrial health in longevity alongside nutritional ketosis, carnivore nutrition, food system decentralisation, and regenerative farming. Dr. Gulhane hosts the Regenerative Health podcast, which I absolutely love, where he interviews leading doctors, health practitioners, and regenerative farmers on these topics. He's also the co-founder of Regenerative Health Retreats, which combines cutting-edge circadian biology with holistic wellness practices. Additionally, he promotes grassroots health solutions through Regenerate, hosting holistic health summits across rural and urban Australia to empower communities to take charge of their health. So, one of the questions we went through was that there is this obsession with getting morning sunlight in your eyes within 10 minutes of waking. But we do know that the full spectrum of light throughout the day matters, not just the morning window. Whilst morning light is important, the wellness industry has reduced a complex biological process to a single action item. And that's oversimplifying and missing the bigger picture. So here's what's actually happening. Morning light is crucial because it contains a specific ratio of blue to red light that signals daytime to your suprachiasmatic, and I'm going to refer to that as SCN, your master clock in the brain. This sets your circadian rhythm from the entire day. But here's what the 10 minutes of morning sun crowd often misses. Daytime outdoor exposure provides vitamin D when UVB is present, along with infrared wavelengths that penetrate deeply into tissues, supporting mitochondrial function. In Australia, it's important to get this safely though, so incidental exposure to your face and arms before 10 a.m. or after 3 p.m. several times a week is usually sufficient for vitamin D needs. The key is consistency rather than intensity. Afternoon and evening light are equally important. As the sun sets, you get another shift in the light spectrum, more red and orange, less blue. This signals to your body that melatonin production should begin ramping up. Now, darkness matters as much as light. Your circadian rhythm isn't just set by light, it's set by the contrast between light and dark throughout the 24-hour cycle. Getting morning sun, but then sitting in the dim indoor lighting all day, followed by bright screens at night, completely disrupts this natural pattern. This isn't just correlation. There's robust mechanistic science here. When photons hit your retina, they're detected by specialized melanopsin-containing retinal ganglion cells. They send signals directly to your SCN, which then coordinates timing signals to every organ in your body, including your gut. The intensity and spectral composition of light determine how strongly these signals fire. Morning light, high in blue, strongly activates them. Evening light, low in blue and high in red, doesn't activate them much, allowing melatonin production to begin. Artificial blue light at night activates them when they shouldn't be, suppressing melatonin and disrupting the entire system. So what's missing from this conversation? The 10 minutes of morning sun advice ignores individual variation. So latitude, season, cloud cover, and skin tone all affect how much light exposure you need. The importance of getting light throughout the day, not just once, That's also something that conversation is missing. It's also missing the critical role of avoiding inappropriate light at night. It's missing the synergistic effects of light on the skin, not just the eyes. And it's also missing the full electromagnetic spectrum beyond just visible light. So yes, morning light matters, but it's one piece of the 24-hour light hygiene practice, not a magic bullet. The gut microbiome has its own circadian rhythm. Multiple studies have shown that gut bacteria fluctuate in a 24-hour cycle, with their abundance, location, and metabolic activity changing predictably throughout the day. So how does this gut clock work, and what influences it? This is where the science gets really fascinating. Your gut microbiome isn't just sitting there passively, it's oscillating in composition and function throughout the day, and this rhythm is deeply connected to your light exposure. So how does this gut clock work? Research shows that a significant portion of our gut bacteria fluctuate in a 24-hour cycle. Studies in humans have found that 15 to 20% of bacterial species demonstrate clear circadian oscillations. This means their abundance, location in the gut, and metabolic activity change predictably over 24 hours. This isn't random, it's coordinated by several interconnected timing signals, such as, first, there's feeding time. When you eat, matters just as much as what you eat. Your gut bacteria respond to regular feeding patterns by adjusting their populations. The species that specialize in breaking down the nutrients you're eating become more abundant at meal times. When you eat at random times, you throw off this rhythm because your bacteria can't anticipate when nutrients will arrive. Secondly, your intestinal cells have their own internal clocks. Your intestinal epithelial cells have their own circadian clock genes. These genes regulate when your gut cells are most permeable to nutrients, when they produce antimicrobial peptides, and when they're most responsive to bacterial signals. Thirdly, there's melatonin, but not the kind you might think. The gut is actually a major source of melatonin production in the body, producing significantly more than the pineal gland. However, this gut melatonin works locally to regulate intestinal function, motility, microbial composition, immune function, and barrier integrity. Light exposure, especially at night, directly affects melatonin production, which then affects your microbiome. Fourth, body temperature plays a role. Your core body temperature fluctuates in a circadian pattern. Gut bacteria are temperature sensitive, and these temperature changes influence which species thrive at different times. Fifth, your gut immune system operates on a schedule. Your gut immune system has circadian variation too. Certain immune cells are more active at different times of the day, which affects which bacteria can colonize and where. And finally, there's a fascinating feedback loop with short-chain fatty acids. Gut bacteria produce short-chain fatty acids, butyrate, propionate, and acetate through fermenting fiber, which I've spoken about many times in my podcast episodes. These short-chain fatty acids, particularly butyrate, directly influence the expression of circadian clock genes in your intestinal cells. So the microbiome helps set the clock, and the clock helps regulate the microbiome. So when this feedback loop is working well, you get a virtuous cycle. Strong circadian rhythms lead to a healthy, diverse microbiome, which produces more short-chain fatty acids, which creates even stronger rhythms. This translates to better metabolic health, improved gut barrier function, appropriate immune responses, and better sleep and energy. So sunlight is more than just vitamin D. For those of us focused on gut health, why does this matter? Most people think about sun exposure solely in terms of vitamin D production, but when we reduce sunlight to just one nutrient, we're missing how it affects your gut health through multiple pathways. Here's what happens beyond vitamin D. First, circadian entrainment through your eyes. When light hits your eyes in the morning, it sets your master circadian clock, which then coordinates timing signals throughout your entire body, including your gut. This affects when your gut is most permeable for nutrient absorption, when your gut immune cells are most active, and when your intestinal cells repair themselves. Whilst everyone knows vitamin D is important for immunity, it has particular jobs in your gut. It regulates tight junction proteins that control intestinal permeability. aka leaky gut, modulates gut immune responses, influences gut barrier integrity, and affects the composition of your microbiome. Third, sun exposure triggers systemic effects that impact your gut. When UV and infrared light hit your skin, you produce compounds that influence digestive function. Beta endorphins, those feel-good hormones, can affect gut motility and pain perception, which is particularly important for IBS. Then there's serotonin. 90% of your body's serotonin is produced in your gut, where it regulates gut motility, pain sensitivity, and immune signaling, not mood. Light exposure affects this production, which is why disrupted circadian rhythms often manifest as digestive issues like irregular bowel movements or IBS symptoms. You also produce melanin, which protects tissues and may help regulate circadian rhythms. And infrared light penetrates deeply, affecting mitochondrial function throughout your body, including in your intestinal cells. Fourth, there's the gut-melatonin connection. Your gut produces significant amounts of melatonin, which we spoke about, far more than the pineal gland in your brain. But this gut melatonin isn't for sleep, it's for local regulation of intestinal motility, gut barrier function, local immune responses, and protection against oxidative stress. Light exposure, especially at the wrong times like blue light at night, disrupts this gut melatonin production. And finally, timing matters just as much as exposure. It's not just about getting sunlight, it's about getting the right wavelengths at the right times. Morning light, which is rich in blue wavelengths, signals daytime to your gut, preparing it for nutrient absorption. Evening light, which is rich in red wavelengths and low in blue, signals your gut to enter its rest and repair phase. The takeaway: you can't replicate the benefits of natural sunlight with the vitamin D supplement alone. The full sensory experience of light through your eyes and on your skin at the right times of the day is fundamental to gut health. And here's what's crucial for those of us in Australia. The key is appropriate exposure, enough to get benefits without burning. This varies based on skin tone, latitude, season, and time of the day. So let's talk about the gut barrier and intestinal permeability, aka leaky gut. The gut lining has its own circadian rhythm, so how does light exposure specifically affect this? The intestinal barrier is one of the most underappreciated aspects of health, and its connection to light exposure is profound, yet completely ignored in mainstream medicine. Your intestinal lining isn't a static wall. It's a dynamic, oscillating barrier that changes its permeability throughout the day. First, your tight junction proteins operate on a schedule. The proteins that hold your intestinal cells together, claudins, occludins, and zonulin, are regulated by circadian clock genes. Their expression and function vary throughout the 24-hour cycle. Second, permeability timing is optimized for when you eat and sleep. Your gut is more permeable during the day when you are actively eating to facilitate nutrient absorption, and at night during your rest period, it becomes less permeable to prevent bacteria from crossing into your bloodstream whilst you sleep. Third, immune surveillance follows a rhythm. The immune cells in your gut wall are more vigilant at times when bacterial exposure is more likely. Essentially, they're on high alert when you're eating. And fourth, mucus production varies throughout the day. The protective mucus layer that covers your intestinal lining is produced in circadian patterns, with thicker mucus during fasting and sleep periods when your gut needs extra protection. So how does light exposure affect all of this? Light sends timing signals throughout your entire body, including to your gut lining. Throughout direct clock signals, so when light hits your eyes in the morning, it sets your master circadian clock in your brain. This clock then tells your intestinal cells when to tighten or loosen their barriers, making your gut more permeable during the day for nutrient absorption and less permeable at night to keep bacteria where they belong. Through hormone shifts, light exposure directly affects gut protective hormones. Cortisol rises with morning light and influences gut permeability. Melatonin, which is suppressed by light and highest in darkness, protects your gut barrier. And growth hormone, which peaks during deep sleep, repairs and renews intestinal cells. and through the gut-brain connection. The vagus nerve carries these circadian signals from your brain directly to your gut, coordinating barrier function, motility, and immune responses throughout the day. So when someone is getting light at the wrong times, like scrolling their phone late at night, things can fall apart. Here's the cascade of dysfunction. That night, there are immediate effects. First, melatonin suppression. Blue light from screens suppress melatonin production, which reduces the protective effect melatonin has on gut barrier integrity, delays sleep onset, reducing the restorative deep sleep when gut cells regenerate, and disrupts the gut's rest and repair period. Second, light at night can trigger inappropriate cortisol release, increasing gut permeability, suppressing gut immune function, and affecting the stress response the next day. Third, gut motility challenges. Light exposure at night confuses your gut's internal clock. When you're exposed to light late at night, your digestive system gets mixed signals. It thinks it's daytime and prepares for food, even though you should be winding down for sleep. This affects when your digestive enzymes are secreted, your gut bacteria, which anticipate regular meal times, and triggers late night cravings. You feel hungry because your gut expects food when it sees light. So over time, chronic effects develop, such as circadian misalignment. Repeated nighttime light exposure causes your master clock, which is entrained by light, to be out of sync with your feeding patterns and other peripheral clocks. Barrier function weakens, the tight junction proteins lose their circadian rhythm, potentially leading to a baseline increase in intestinal permeability, bacterial translocation, systemic inflammation, and food sensitivities as undigested proteins cross the barrier. The microbiome becomes dysbiotic. Your gut bacteria expect a predictable light-dark cycle via your circadian rhythms. When this is disrupted, you get reduced diversity, overgrowth of pro-inflammatory species, reduced short-chain fatty acid producing bacteria, and changes in bacterial location. So, for example, bacteria moving from the colon to the small intestine. Metabolic consequences follow, like insulin resistance, weight gain, especially visceral fat, increased risk of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and elevated inflammatory markers. So the clinical picture looks like someone with chronic circadian disruption, whether from shift work or even just habitual late night screen use, will often present with digestive issues like bloating and irregular bowel movements, food sensitivities that seem to appear out of nowhere, inflammatory conditions, poor sleep quality, fatigue and brain fog, difficulty losing weight, and mood disorders. And here's the frustrating part. You can throw all the gut healing supplements, probiotics, and elimination diets at this person. Still, if you don't fix the circadian disruption, you're not addressing the root cause. So let's bring it all together. Thanks for sticking with me. What Dr. Gulhane's work highlights is that we've lost our connection to the natural light-dark cycle, and we're paying for it with our health. The gut is just one of the many systems affected, but it's a particularly sensitive one because, number one, it has its own circadian clocks. Number two, it houses trillions of bacteria that also respond to circadian rhythms. Number three, it is directly affected by hormones and neural signals from your master clock. And number four, it produces signaling molecules like short-chain fatty acids and melatonin that feed back to influence your circadian rhythms. When you restore proper light exposure patterns, you're not just getting vitamin D or fixing your sleep. You're resynchronizing a complex network of biological clocks that affect every aspect of your physiology, from your gut microbiome to your metabolism to your immune system. This is the regenerative health approach that Max champions, addressing root causes by realigning our biology with the natural environmental inputs we evolved with. Light is medicine, but only when we respect its full spectrum and natural rhythms. Now that we've covered the science behind how light affects your gut, I want to bring in Dr. Max Gulhane to discuss how we can actually apply this knowledge. Let's dive into our conversation. Great. So we just got cut off. Where are we at?
So the melatonin gut connection, I think one of the key points here is that if we are ingesting food that has potential glyphosate residue on it, then what that glyphosate is doing, and this was the crux behind why it was originally deemed to be not consequential for human health, is that the way that glyphosate works is that it targets an enzyme called ESPS synthase, or the shikimate pathway. And it's correct that humans don't contain that enzyme in our mammalian cells, but what we do have is a commensal gut bacteria that absolutely have that pathway, and the downstream consequences of inhibiting that pathway is potentially disrupting melatonin synthesis. So I guess what I'm hinting at here is that the melatonin being produced by the gut, I think, is probably going to be partly related to what we're eating, and certain foods, say like cherries, have obviously been shown to contain more melatonin in them. Part of it is natural production by the gut microbiota organisms themselves, and a lot of it is also being made in the epithelial cells or in our cells on exposure to near infrared light. So there's a lot going on, but I think the crux of the matter is that melatonin is absolutely one of our best friends, and anything that we can do to optimize melatonin production synthesis is going to be in the best interest of our total health as well as our gut health.
And you've spoken about different types of light, and I just want you to quickly run through that, because people might be like, well, blue light, where do I find that? There's UV, there's visible, there's infrared. Blue light, you've mentioned some other things. For those that may not be familiar with where these are found, could you just give us a quick brief rundown on that?
Sure. So the sun emits a massive amount of electromagnetic radiation, and it hits the earth, and a lot of it is actually filtered, or we're protected from it. We don't get gamma rays, we don't get X-rays on planet Earth. The magnetic field of the Earth deflects a lot of these other charged particles or heavy particles, and the ozone layer prevents us from getting really short wavelength UVC light. So and then at longer wavelengths, the water vapor in the atmosphere absorbs a lot. So what we have when we stand on planet Earth is a pretty narrow range of light that spans, and we talk about wavelengths of the light, from about 280 nanometers, which is in the UVB, which we use to make vitamin D, all the way up to 2,500, 3,000 and beyond nanometers. And our human eye has adapted or evolved to only be able to perceive in this visible range from 400 to 400, 700, or 760, whatever you want to call it. So we can see violet, that's right at the edge of visual perception, but below that is ultraviolet, literally it's too short for us to see. So there's UVA, there's UVB below that, and then after violet, purple, and you go into blue, and it's the blue light and around 480 nanometers that the circadian system is maximally sensitive to. And that is this key blue light detecting proteins in those retinal ganglion cells, which are called melanopsin, that's ultimately the most sensitive to blue light. And as I alluded to earlier, that is also the wavelength range that these modern lighting, LED lighting, compact fluorescent lamps are enriched in. So beyond blue, we've got green, and human visual, the spectral sensitivity, or the ability for us to essentially discriminate, is optimized in green, in around 555 nanometers, and then into the yellow and orange and red. And red is showing really beneficial effects in with the photobiomodulation field, in terms of optimizing mitochondrial function and improving electron transport, and same with the near infrared. So beyond red, as I mentioned earlier, we can't actually see those photons, but they're profoundly affecting human health. And the tragedy of what has happened with indoor lighting regulations is that we've had bureaucrats conspiring with engineers, with none of whom have any idea about biology or photobiology, who've decided that the long wavelength light beyond essentially beyond 700 nanometers is wasted energy, is useless to humans. But what they don't realize is that energy is absolutely being used. It's been used by the body to maintain our health. So what we're left with when people go to work underneath blue visible only lighting is that we're getting a constant stimulation, a constant circadian stimulation in the blue range, but it's not natural circadian stimulation. We've got inadequate brightness and we've got no variation in the brightness or in the color temperature, which is essentially a indicator of the relative intensities of different wavelengths. And what I mean by that is when you get out in the morning, the light changes. It's relatively enriched in red, near infrared. And then as the sun angle climbs, more short wavelength is able to penetrate through the atmosphere. So the infrared never goes away, but you get a greater addition of blue and UV such that the proportions change. And that change of proportion is key in signaling time of day and again circadian and mitochondrial function. So I guess how this relates to gut health is that people are inside all day, and this is good data that we have that 90% of time is being spent indoors. People aren't getting full spectrum sunlight, neither they're in their eye nor on their body, and we're being deprived of this really important long wavelength light that is helping to optimize our health and provide appropriate circadian signals. So that is what's the reality where we're in now, is that the everyday person's not only got to contend with junk food and seed oils and everything and ultra processed ingredients and additives, preservatives, emulsifiers, and food flown in from completely a foreign latitude and season, but we also have to deal with this junk light environment. And as we've kind of alluded to, the junk light is adding insult to injury. It's setting the scene for gut disturbance and gut disease. And then if you've got someone who's had chronic vitamin D deficiency, chronic circadian rhythm disruption, their immune cells are hyperactive, and then you chuck on some processed foods, you chuck on some, I don't know, McDonald's with emulsifier or some other processed food ingredients, and then bang, that was the trigger, and that now they develop Crohn's disease, or now they develop ulcerative colitis. So with any of these chronic diseases, it's a multi-hit hypothesis. There's genetic susceptibilities, but there's environmental triggers that if you stack them on top of each other in the wrong order in the wrong person, then that person falls sick.
And so for those that like in the real world, who might be shift workers, healthcare workers, uni students, mums, parents, their circadian rhythms are often disrupted by necessity, not necessarily by choice. What's your advice for them?
Absolutely. So there's thankfully, although the photobiology is somewhat complex, the action points are incredibly simple. What we need to do is take time to make a couple of key points throughout the day and night. And these habit changes will basically set you up for much better circadian health and stronger circadian rhythm. So what we want to do during, maybe I'll start with the evening, is that we want to keep light at night to an absolute minimum. And yes, it's potentially not realistic if you've got to do things, you got to work, etc. But what you can do is reduce the total amount of light. So turn off overhead downlights and LED downlights. Turn off bright light above head that is going to be suppressing your pineal gland's melatonin production.
So like a rock light.
Yeah. So
something like that. We do that in the evening. We don't have light at all.
Yeah.
Just have that going on.
Yeah. So the best options are something like candlelight. Beeswax candles are great. Or incandescent globes. And now you can get these on eBay. You can't get them from Kmart or anywhere else because they've been phased out again in the name of planetary health, which is it, as I alluded to, it doesn't make sense because we're sacrificing our mitochondrial health by being under these LED lighting. But you get something like an old incandescent bulb, because that emits a much less disruptive light spectrum at night. Ideally, you wouldn't have any light, but we still have to exist in the real world. But you'd be surprised at how little you need to light a room, and simply using one incandescent globe in our kitchen is more than enough. And things like blue light blocking glasses, and they can be a great tool to allow you to block the bluer wavelengths of light, but still see what you're doing. And that's second best if you can't, for some reason, your partner keeps that keeps the lights on or refuses to turn them off, then things like blue light blockers are the next best thing. But still, it's best to cultivate the lowest light environment, because as I mentioned, it's not only the wavelengths that's important, but it's actually the total brightness itself, as well as the position of the light.
What about a shift worker though?
So shift work is
like a nurse or something that like, how could they, if they've worked all night and they've come home and they've got to get some sleep throughout the day, are they just stuffed? Like what's the go there?
Yeah, so shift work is a unique position, and my first advice to anyone who's doing shift work is try and move your shifts, because that's always going to be, we know it's a carcinogen. It's actually, it contributes to metabolic diseases and breast and bowel cancers. But if you can't, then it seems to be the best way to minimize disruption on gut function, metabolic health is actually to not eat overnight. And I know it sounds radical, but whatever you consume in the circadian inactive phase will get stored, essentially. And if you eat carbs and sugar, you will absolutely get stored in visceral fat stores. And that's what makes you insulin resistant and diabetic and give you hypertension, sleep apnea, and everything you don't want. So what worked for me when I work shift work is to essentially fast overnight and only drink water, spring water overnight, and then go to sleep immediately when you get home. Keep the room as cool and dark as possible. And when you wake up at 3 p.m., 4 p.m., then eat a large meal outside. And that seems to be one of the best ways to mitigate the circadian rhythm disruption on metabolic health. And there's actually been a recent study essentially validating that approach.
Amazing. And I'm really conscious of time. I know that you're probably in clinic today. So I want to ask you, because you obviously practice what you preach. So can you walk us through your typical day, like when you get light exposure? What does your morning routine look like, daytime, evening, that sort of thing, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah, of course. So maybe as you mentioned earlier, we run some health retreats, and that experience is what I like to use to instruct people about, or show people what is optimal for an optimal circadian day. And look, the crux of it is that we're respecting the ambient conditions and wherever we are. And the further away from the equator you live, the more extreme you essentially have to be in order to maintain optimal circadian function. And that's many reasons why living further north, people find it can be easier to heal, is because you've got stable day night length, and you've got stable ultraviolet exposure. So what it means is, what we want to be moving towards is waking up just before sunrise, getting outside immediately. Don't look at phones, don't look at artificial light sources, don't turn on the lamp, don't turn on the light switch. Go straight outside, plant your feet on the ground, your bare feet, and depending where you are, get as much skin exposed. We didn't mention, but the skin is also has a peripheral clock. It also has photoreceptors in it. So getting the most amount of skin exposed is helping entrain the circadian rhythm. It's information that the body uses to entrain circadian function. So get those skin exposed, get your bare eyes facing the east, and ideally get that sunrise in. And the benefit there is that this is the most, I would say, it's that the end of the night and the arrival of the sun essentially signals the end of the night phase, so that the body can start ramping up cortisol production appropriately, and can start, because there is obviously blue light in the sunrise, just proportionally less, it can start stopping production of your melatonin, so that the whole hormonal system starts kicking in. So ideally, depending on how sick you are, the longer you need to stay there. And for those who have gut problems, absolutely getting that gut exposed. And then you want to, at various times throughout the day, sample the light that's on offer. And if how much ultraviolet B light you get, because we have is going to depend on your skin type. And here in Australia, we've got people of Northern European extraction in an area of extreme UV. So what this simply means is we just have to understand what our ethnic background is, understand what the solar conditions were of our ancestors, and probably respect those when it comes to deliberate sunlight exposure. But what I've found benefit for people is, if you're healing from a gut condition, then absolutely get your abdomen in the sun, build vitamin D in that area. That solar exposure will help not only build your vitamin D level, but reshape that gut microbiome. And we didn't talk about the 2019 study, but they basically had 3 suberythemal doses of UVB, so not even enough to burn, and it significantly altered diversity of the gut microbiome in a positive way.
Wow.
So get your sunlight, get your abdomen out, get it exposed to the sun. Start if you're looking down and you're suffering from IBD or irritable bowel syndrome, and you look down and you got a pale abdomen, you're doing it wrong. You need to start building a tan there. And I didn't even talk about the melanocortins. It's a little bit technical, but essentially the pro hormone that the body cleaves off, alpha MSH, which is the trigger for melanocytes to produce melanin, which is the tan. The same it's a peptide master hormone, that those same peptide hormones influence immune function and help to induce immune tolerance. So when they say there's no such thing as a healthy tan, it's blatantly wrong. The idea that tanning is skin cells and trauma is a half truth. It is incompletely true, because yes, there's a cell kind of response happening, a UV damage, DNA damage, it's occurring, but it's actually what we call hormetic stress, and the body secretes melanin in response to that, and that in and of itself is a beneficial thing. So building up gut health from the ground is that you want to be outside, you want to be spending as much time as you can outside, you want to titrate your UV exposure so you can get a nice tan, especially on the abdomen. And throughout the day, just be outside. And what we didn't talk about again either was the fact that this long wavelength near infrared light passes through clothing. So if you're wearing cotton, you're wearing linen, you can get the benefits of this near infrared on mitochondrial function without necessarily having your skin exposed. So you can, again, just spend as much time outside. And then we talked about the nighttime, keep the lights low, turn off devices around the bedroom, have emitters of radio frequency radiation like Wi-Fi routers or smart devices off around the sleeping area. And yeah, if you can do those, then we will find whatever you're doing from a dietary point of view will become, you're essentially force multiplying any dietary intervention. And obviously you probably tell your clients about the dietary stuff, but I advise, and I've seen some great results with pretty strict elimination down to something like a carnivore type diet that is usually able to be rebuilt once people have fixed their light environment. And that's the key difference that I see between patients who essentially get stuck, by lack of a better word, on carnivore and not able to deviate back, or not being able to reintroduce anything back. The difference between those people and those people that eventually are healing from the gut point of view, the ones that heal are the ones that have built their vitamin D level up. They're respecting the light environment, and those are the ones that I see that longer term healing in.
And yeah, look, I think that's a conversation for another day, the carnivore side of things, because I'm not a massive advocate for carnivore, but I like to hear that you say you're insinuating that you don't like people to get stuck on that diet. It's not a forever diet, because we have, as people that work in the area of gut health, have seen the collateral damage of a long-term diet like that. So it's
Absolutely.
used as therapy for a period of time under the guidance of someone and not forever. And I think that's
Absolutely.
something to really point out. But you mentioned infrared, and in your presentation that I saw online, you mentioned that its ability to penetrate 8 to 10 centimeters. Is that what you're referring to, even through the linen? So would that be helpful for a shift worker to use near infrared? Can you, like, external sort of, like, I don't know how to say that, but like, yeah, what's your thoughts on infrared light therapy
Yeah.
for those that are shift workers and
Yeah,
those?
no, and to color in a little bit more about what I mentioned with the dietary intake. Fundamentally, the most appropriate dietary from a if we're taking the circadian approach is whatever's available locally, and the
Yes.
reason is because the mitochondria, which are transforming energy for us, they're inside our cells. They're constantly seeking to marry up the external inputs, of which food is one, and the food consumed locally or grown locally is part of that process. So ultimately, what I believe is that if people are nailing their environment, and yes, it's probably those who can have more time to actually spend outside, or the sickest people that need to adopt this approach, what they eat becomes less important. And yes, any kind of static dietary approach, I think, isn't necessarily going to be ideal if it's ignoring what's seasonally going to be available. So, as I said before, humans have adapted to essentially eat anything. We're extremely robust. But for those who live or are working and have gotten in a very, very bad place, I do see it as it can be a very powerful intervention. Now, in terms of infrared supplementation, that's essentially what we're referring to with, say photobiomodulation, a red light therapy panel. Yeah, I mean, it isn't, it's not going to replace morning exposure by any means, but it can be used as, in supplemental form to benefit, if especially if people do have a busy schedule. The evidence seems to favor morning use of these red light therapy panels. The mitochondria seem to be more responsive at morning for red and infrared light. So I would probably advise morning use if someone's going to embark on that. But yeah, well, they're safe, they're well tolerated, and yeah, if we can't make wholesale changes, then some, maybe even as little as once a week or twice a week could be beneficial.
So this kind of the whole conversation ties in well to your broader work in regenerative health and getting back to ancestral patterns. So any final thoughts on how light gut microbiome connection fits into your philosophy of
Yeah,
regenerative medicine? And also,
yeah,
can you tell us a little bit about what you've got on offer, like your retreats and that sort of thing?
sure. I think, again, referring back to the Amazonian guys, and again, maybe I'll give you the link. You can share it for people to watch this video. But if you look at how we as Homo sapiens existed, and there's many ways to kind of describe this concept. One that I really like lately is from Professor Alison Nunn, who's the chief scientific officer at the Gaia Foundation, who are doing, basically some of the world's most cutting edge, supporting some of the most cutting edge quantum biology research. Is this idea of a metabolic envelope. So in aviation, you have what's called a flight envelope of an aircraft, and it's the certain conditions by which it's safe to operate. Certain altitude, certain speeds, certain conditions determine that the engineering of the aircraft determines this envelope. The same goes with humans. And what our metabolic envelope is a set of conditions by which we have evolved, and what evolution has essentially selected for us and optimized for us. And when we take this to the extreme, we see that people in the space station, in the submariners, they absolutely fall apart. And they fall apart because their mitochondria aren't able to do what they need to do. They're lacking the key inputs that their mitochondria need. So how this is relevant, I guess, from a gut health point of view, is if we're looking at those tribal people in the Amazon, this is close to what I think humans ancestral, or our metabolic envelope is. And There's no dish soap, there's no antibiotics, and obviously antibiotics have a place, absolutely, but there's no glyphosate, there's no hand washing. They're they're basically in contact with the microbes of their environment. In addition to having these circadian signals optimized and obviously eating a hyper local diet. And I think that that is actually more important, as we alluded to. If you're nailing all those, then exactly what someone is eating. And again, yeah, it's hard. Absolutely, we can't recreate that. We will have to work. We will have to live our lifestyles. But being immersed in not afraid of essentially sharing microbes with our environment, potentially incorporating locally fermented foods, locally fermented honey, that these types of things, metabolic health permitting. These can all be really beneficial because it's, again, providing a local environmental input that your body's helping to integrate into this whole light and circadian and overall health kind of picture. So it is holistic, absolutely. There's often no silver bullet, and everyone's situation is kind of needs to be tailored and unique. But if we get and work on those fundamentals of respecting our light environment and eating local food, cutting out all processed foods, you're really kind of a lot of the way already there. And that is like the foundation of my gut healing protocols and my advice to patients.
Amazing.
As it relates to what we're doing, I'm just obviously I'm working clinically at the moment. A little bit of time to really support my own podcasts, and we're going to have another regenerative health retreat in July, and I give you the details when I release that. But that's essentially our fourth iteration of what we call circadian living, which is
amazing,
showing people what an ideal circadian lifestyle looks like over the period of 4 days. So yeah, that's what's on for me. There's some more stuff in the pipeline potentially, but for the time being, yeah, that's what's going on.
And I'll make sure I pop all that in the show notes so people can connect with you. But look, I'd love to get you back on again because there's just so much that I'd love to pick your brain about. And I really appreciate you being passionate about this area because it's so important for all of us, and it can be forgotten about, so and it's just so powerful as well, and we can feel it almost instantly when I simply go out for a morning walk, 6 o'clock in the morning, and how that impacts my mental health, and I didn't get into it, but my skin has always been great, and this year it just had a rosacea moment. Sleep's been impacted, lots of blue light from studies and stuff. So I'm like, well, I wonder how much that's kind of impacting my skin. So even doing those morning walks and ice bath on my face, I've noticed kind of differences there. And it's powerful stuff. So guys, if you feel like that's an area that needs a little bit of work, please implement some of the things that we've discussed. And if you want further information on it, check out Regenerative Health. You just go down all sorts of rabbit holes, and I always hang for the next one. So I really appreciate you coming on today and sharing your pearls of wisdom with us.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Lindo. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
You're very welcome. And guys, if you have enjoyed this conversation or someone that needs to hear it, please make sure that you share it with them so they can fill up on the valuable content that Dr. Max Gulhane has presented to us today.